From Bahamut Mega Flare to Anima's Oblivion, summons in Final Fantasy have always been beings of destruction. But of all of these mythical creatures, which one actually reigns supreme? Across decades of games, summons have evolved from simple pixel flashes into cinematic gods, each one unforgettable in its power, design and meaning. From tiny spells of aid to colossal creatures that carry the story itself. Some protect and some destroy. But out of all of these legendary beings, which one reigns supreme? Which summon stands above the rest? Not just for power, but for legacy, utility and story. Hey folks, Simon here from Fuzzfinger Gaming, and today we're ranking 12 of the greatest Final Fantasy summons, and to do so we need to set some ground rules. So we're going to be judging them across 4 key pillars. 1. The raw power. So this is the sheer and destructive might and spectacle that defines Final Fantasy summons in battle. The next will be utility and versatility. These creatures can protect your team and even change the flow of combat. The next category will be the narrative impact, and this will cover the summons that are not just in battle abilities, but actual characters and story moments that shape those worlds. And finally, the last category is iconic status. Some of these summons are just legendary, and they count themselves amongst the faces of the franchise that fans recognise instantly. So across these 4 categories, we'll be looking at 12 of the greatest Final Fantasy summons, but by the end, only one will stand above the rest. The supreme summon of the Final Fantasy universe. So come along for the ride, and let's get started. Category 1, Raw Power. When people think of Final Fantasy summons, the first thing that comes to mind isn't healing or clever tactics, it's devastation. Massive cinematic attacks that, feel like overkill, turning bosses into dust and making you wonder how your PlayStation didn't melt from rendering it. And for this first category, we are looking at pure, unadulterated, destructive force. The summons that bring the biggest numbers, the most jaw-dropping visuals, and the kind of power that defines Final Fantasy's identity. And we have to start with the king, Bahamut. Across nearly every Final Fantasy, Bahamut represents raw destruction. His Mega Flare ignores defense, deals massive non-elemental damage, and has evolved from simple pixel beams in the SNES days to screen-filling apocalypses in the modern games. In Final Fantasy VII, my own personal favourite, he has multiple upgrades with Neo Bahamut and Bahamut Zero, each more ridiculous than the last. And in Final Fantasy XIV, Bahamut isn't just a summon, he's literally the cause of one of the most iconic, world-changing events in the series' history. Bahamut isn't just powerful, he is power. He's the measuring stick by which other summons are judged. But if we're talking sheer numbers, we can't ignore Knights of the Round in Final Fantasy VII. This wasn't just another summon, it was the ultimate prize for dedicated players. Breeding a gold chocobo to reach that hidden island was practically a rite of passage, and once you had it, 13 hits, each capable of max damage, often wiping out even the toughest super bosses. Combine it with the Mime and W summon materia and you basically broke the game. Knights of the Round wasn't just strong, it was comically, absurdly strong, the kind of summon that made friends crowd around the TV just to watch the animation play out. And then we've got Eden from Final Fantasy VIII, arguably the most over-the-top summon in terms of presentation. Its Eternal Breath attack is famously one of the longest summon animations in the series, almost a mini cutscene in and of itself, but it's not just for show. With proper junctions and boosts, Eden could hit absurd damage outputs, easily maxing the damage cap multiple times. Eden didn't just feel powerful, it looked like you were unleashing a cosmic god. Final Fantasy X introduced Anima, one of the darkest summons in the series, with a backstory that made her presence even more haunting. Her Oblivion attack, dragging enemies into the void and annihilating them with chain strikes, is seared into the memory of anyone who played this game. Anima wasn't just powerful in terms of the gameplay, she felt terrifying. The kind of summon you didn't just use, but unleashed, a little bit like opening Pandora's box. And finally in this category, there's Zodiark. the hidden Esper in Final Fantasy XII, and one of the strongest Totema in Tactics. Unlike Bahamut or Shiva, Zodiark isn't a household name, but within his games he's treated as the forbidden summon, reserved for those willing to push through some of the hardest optional fights. When you finally earned him, Zodiark could flatten enemies with his darkness abilities, attacks so devastating they often felt like cheating once you had them. So when it comes to raw destructive force, these summons all bring something insane to the table. Eden and Anima are unforgettable for their spectacle and atmosphere. Zodiark is that forbidden ace card, but in the end, two really stand above the rest. Knights of the Round is the undisputed king of raw damage. No summer really comes close to breaking the game quite like it, and Bahamut, in all his forms, represents power itself, not just devastating damage, but the face of summoning in Final Fantasy. But as we all know, power alone doesn't make a summon supreme. Sometimes the most valuable summons aren't the ones that can nuke the screen, but the ones that can save your party from a tight spot or completely change your strategy. Category 2, Utility and Versatility. Okay, so raw power is great, but Final Fantasy is not just about hitting those biggest numbers. Sometimes the most valuable summons are the ones that give you a fighting chance when you're on the ropes or open up entirely new strategies. In this section we're looking at utility and versatility, summons that protect, heal, or twist the rules of battle in ways pure damage never could. And first up here we have Phoenix. If there's one utility summon that stands head and shoulders above the rest, it's this fiery bird of rebirth. From its earliest appearances, Phoenix's role was simple but game-changing: revive fallen allies while dealing fire damage to the enemy. That single ability has saved countless parties from a wipe. In Final Fantasy IX, Phoenix could even trigger as a passive event if your entire party was KO'd, essentially giving you a second chance at life. In fact, that's exactly what happened to me when live streaming this game and trying to defeat Ozma. He actually beat us, we got a game over, but fortunately Aiko was able to summon Phoenix and the battle was won. In Final Fantasy X, Yuna's Phoenix Down ability through the Aeon Summon reinforced that legacy. It's not the flashiest, but when Phoenix shows up, it feels like a literal lifesaver, because it often is. Then we have Carbuncle, one of the most creative utility summons in the series. Instead of damage, Carbuncle typically casts Reflect on the entire party. That means enemy spells bounce back, turning the tide of battle in ways that feel clever and satisfying. Carbuncle has had different twists depending on the game, sometimes Reflect, sometimes Protect or Shell, but the common thread is that it gives you tools to outsmart your opponents. In Final Fantasy VIII, for example, Carbuncle was an easily missable Guardian force that could completely neuter enemy magic-heavy bosses. Carbuncle might not look imposing, it's a small, adorable creature, but it is the embodiment of brains over brawn. Now, I do believe that Alexander deserves a place here too. Usually represented by a gigantic mechanical fortress or holy guardian, Alexander's abilities typically involve holy elemental damage. However, in Final Fantasy IX, summoning Alexander is one of the most cinematic moments across the entire game, where he literally shields Alexandria from Bahamut's attacks. In gameplay, his role does tend to lean towards the offensive, casting powerful abilities like Holy Judgment. But this role is not universal. For example, in Final Fantasy XIII, he takes on the more typical tanking Sentinel role, and as such, Alexander represents the idea that summons can be guardians as much as weapons. But not all summons in the Final Fantasy franchise are iconic only because they are powerful or versatile from a gameplay perspective. In fact, some of them are unforgettable precisely because of how deeply they've woven themselves into the story itself. Which brings us to our next category. Folks, I hope you are enjoying this video on the Final Fantasy summons. If so, please do hit the like button. And if you want to watch my next video before everybody else, then consider becoming a channel member. Members receive up to 4 days early access on my future long-form videos. But now, back to the rankings. Category 3, narrative impact. Summons are not always just flashy attacks or strategic tools. In some Final Fantasy games, they're woven into the very heart of the story. They can be gods, guardians, or even tragic characters whose fates are bound to the heroes. This category is about their narrative impact, the summons that left a lasting impression because of their role in the story, not just their utility in battle. And kicking us off here, few summons embody narrative weight better than Anima in Final Fantasy X. Unlike most Aeons, Anima has a haunting backstory. She's the corrupted soul of Seymour's mother, willingly sacrificed so her son could pursue power. When you first fight her, she feels unstoppable, a terrifying manifestation of Seymour's twisted ambition. Later, when you gain her as your own Aeon, there's this dark satisfaction in turning that same overwhelming force against your enemies. Anima isn't just a summon, she's a piece of tragic storytelling, a reminder of how much pain lies beneath Spira's cycle of sacrifice. Alexander also deserves recognition here. In Final Fantasy IX, his appearance is one of the most jaw-dropping cinematic moments in the game, and just when Bahamut threatens to annihilate Alexandria, the city itself transforms, revealing Alexander as its guardian. That entire sequence is unforgettable. Holy light surging through the castle walls, the clash between Alexander and Bahamut framed like a battle of gods. It's a rare case where a summon isn't just a tool for the player, but a fully integrated story beat that changes the course of the narrative. Even outside of 9, Alexander's recurring image as a massive fortress or divine protector gives him a symbolic weight that few other summons can match. Now, Final Fantasy XVI took this idea further than ever before by making summons, or icons as they're called here, central to the entire story. Ifrit, long seen as a staple fire summon throughout the franchise, becomes a key mystery tied to Clive's destiny. His battles against other icons drive the game's biggest moments, giving the summon system an unprecedented level of narrative focus. Ramuh too plays a pivotal role in 16, not just as a lightning summon, but as a mentor figure in Cid, embodying wisdom and rebellion against oppression. For once, summons weren't just tools of war, they were characters with voices, motives and personal stakes in the story. And for me, both in Final Fantasy XVI and beyond, Odin also deserves mention for narrative presence. Often depicted as a lone rider who can instantly cleave enemies in two, Odin embodies inevitability and finality. In some games, he even becomes part of the story as a trial or guardian you must face, adding mythic weight to his appearances. He's not as tied to the main plot as Ifrit or Alexander, but every time Odin shows up, it feels like a significant event. So which summons stand out the most for narrative impact? Odin and Ramuh bring mythic gravitas, but they're more consistent side figures. Alexander provides one of the most unforgettable cinematic moments in the series. Ifrit's role in Final Fantasy XVI pushes him into the spotlight like never before. But in terms of pure emotional weight, nothing quite compares to Anima. She's not just a powerful Aeon, she's a story of sacrifice, corruption and tragedy wrapped into a single terrifying design. For narrative impact, Anima is the summon that leaves the deepest scar. Still, not every summon needs a tragic backstory or a grand cinematic moment to matter. Some of them are just instantly recognisable, mascots of the series that have become as iconic as Chocobos and Moogles. And that takes us into our final category. Category 4, Iconic Status. Some summons earn their place through power, others through story, but a select few stand apart simply because they embody Final Fantasy. You could show their silhouette, their spell animation, even just their name, and fans instantly know what you are talking about. This final category is about iconic status, the summons that have become cultural touchstones, recurring faces of the series, and symbols that represent the franchise itself. So let's start with Shiva, the Ice Queen of Final Fantasy. She's appeared in nearly every mainline game since Final Fantasy III. Her design evolving with each new generation of hardware, sometimes regal, sometimes ethereal, but always beautiful and deadly. Shiva's signature attack, Diamond Dust, has been a franchise staple for decades. What makes her iconic isn't just her consistency, but also her style. Shiva embodies the series' ability to blend elegance with destruction, and she's become one of the most beloved recurring summons in the fanbase. On the opposite end, we have Ifrit, the fiery beast often positioned as Shiva's counterpart. Like Shiva, Ifrit has appeared across the series, but his role has grown significantly in recent years. In FF16, Ifrit isn't just a summon, he's at the heart of the story, tied to Clive's destiny and the icon clashes that define the game. That push into the narrative spotlight only reinforced what fans already knew. Ifrit is one of the most defining summons in the series. Together, Shiva and Ifrit form a yin-yang of elemental icons, ice and fire, elegance and ferocity. Then of course there's Bahamut. If there's one summon that could stand as the single most iconic, it's gotta be him. The Dragon King has appeared in more Final Fantasy titles than almost any other summon, and his attack, Mega Flare, has become shorthand for overwhelming destruction. He's more than just another recurring summon. He's practically the poster child for the entire concept of summoning, whether it's his role in FF4, his cinematic evolution in 7, or his apocalyptic presence in 14. Bahamut's name alone commands respect. But next up there's Odin, who also deserves a mention here. The lone rider who gallops onto the battlefield, cleaves enemies in half, and sometimes misses entirely. His presence has always been dramatic. He may not have the universal appeal of Bahamut or the elemental twins, but Odin brings mythic weight every time he appears. He is the ultimate wildcard summon, iconic not for reliability, but certainly for sheer style. And finally, let's not forget about Ramuh, the old sage, master of thunder. With his flowing beard, staff and judgment bolt attack, Ramuh has stood out as the archetypal wise mentor summon. His role in Final Fantasy XV, guiding the player, and again in 16, cemented him as more than just a lightning spellcaster. Ramuh might not have the flashy glamour of Shiva or the brute force of Bahamut, but his iconic status comes from being the wise constant, I guess the Gandalf of Final Fantasy summons. So who takes the crown for iconic status? Well, Shiva and Ifrit are instantly recognisable, a duo that has defined the elemental heart of summoning for decades, but Odin and Ramuh bring some of that much needed personality to the roster. But when it comes to being the symbol of Final Fantasy summons, there's no denying Bahamut. He is the Dragon King, the recurring champion, the summon that fans expect to see in every game. And if any summon can claim to be the face of the franchise, it's gotta be him. And so now we've looked into the raw power, the clever utility, the tragic narratives, and even the iconic status. Now it's time to put it all together. Out of the 12 summons, which one truly reigns supreme? And just before we conclude the Supreme Summon, let's talk about some honourable mentions. Leviathan, the mighty sea serpent, has been washing enemies away since the early games and remains a staple of aquatic chaos. Yojimbo from Final Fantasy X, the mercenary who will one-shot bosses if you are willing to pay the price. And definitely a fan favourite, Doom Train from Final Fantasy VIII, easily one of the strangest and most creative summons in the series. A demonic locomotive that inflicts nearly every status ailment imaginable. Half train, half nightmare. These mentions won't be taking the crown today, but they do remind us just how imaginative and downright bizarre Final Fantasy summons can actually be. Right, so we've seen it all. The nukes that flatten enemies in seconds, the lifesavers who keep your party standing when all hope seems lost, the tragic summons with stories that still haunt us, and the timeless icons that define what it means to summon in Final Fantasy. But the big question remains, which summon rules supreme? From raw power, we've got Knights of the Round and Bahamut, two unstoppable forces of destruction. From utility, Phoenix rises as the ultimate saviour. From narrative, Anima leaves an unforgettable impression with her tragic backstory. And from iconic status, Bahamut towers above the rest as the face of Final Fantasy summons. Growing up with Final Fantasy VII, my first Final Fantasy, I absolutely loved every time I was able to summon Knights of the Round. It was absurdly strong, but let's be honest, it's more of a reward for grinding than a summon that defines the series. Incredible? Yes, but maybe too much of a one-off to be supreme. As for Phoenix, it is invaluable when it shows up, but it's still situational. It doesn't define the summon experience the way that some others do. Anima is certainly unforgettable, both in design and story, but ultimately her legacy is still tied to one game. She's powerful, she's tragic, but she doesn't carry the same weight across the entire franchise. And that leaves Bahamut. He is the one constant, the recurring Dragon King whose Mega Flare is etched onto the DNA of the series. Whether you first met him in Final Fantasy IV, unleashed one of his forms in 7, or watched him reshape entire worlds in 14, Bahamut is always treated as something truly special. He is raw power, he's iconic, and he's the summon fans expect to see in every game. For me, that makes Bahamut the supreme summon, the king over them all. So now folks, it's your turn. Drop a comment down below and tell me who is your favourite summon across the entire Final Fantasy franchise. Which do you think rules supreme? But that's it from me for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.